Hi, everyone. This is Kalika with the EO Wonder Podcast, and I'm so excited to have the CEO and founder of BLANKSPACES here in person in our podcast studio in Studio City.
Thanks for inviting me. I've been looking forward to this.
So how's it going, Jerome?
BLANKSPACES is a co-working space, which is basically a community of entrepreneurs and freelancers. So they share office space really to collaborate. In some ways, people say that people will come for the space, but stay for the community. I've been doing this for 17 years, and it's just been an interesting ride watching how people work over the years. And I think there's a huge focus right now on what they call RTO, return to office, and hybrid work and work from home and any term that you want to think of. Basically, people who work in an office, it could be an office that's in HQ, headquarters, or an office that you decided will be at your home, at the coffee shop, wherever. And we're right in the middle of all those discussions because we are an office that people choose to come to work. I think it's just great to be part of that conversation.
So you've had BLANKSPACES for over 17 years. What was it like in the beginning? Did everyone know what a co-working space was, or were you a pioneer?
I'm now the oldest continually operating co-working space in America. Some of my fellow co-working spaces who had started or been around that era, they've all closed down, unfortunately.
Including?
Well, one notable one that came a few years later, around 2011, 2012 era, was WeWork. And WeWork had a couple of movies about them. And they were just a classic case of Icarus. Got very ambitious, maybe overly ambitious, flew too close to the sun, crashed, and they also have 9 lives. They've had many chances to recover, rebuild, and now they've shown, I think, 2 or 3 consecutive quarters of positive earnings. So that is an amazing fall from grace and recovery, like Phoenix Rising. And it's testament to how there's enough people who really believe in what WeWork's trying to do, which is our category of co-working, and that it's really the future of how people work. And if you really frame it as how people work, that's just the most fundamental question, because people live somewhere and they work somewhere. And now it's a question of, we've questioned the assumption of one place to work. Now it's where can you work and where do you choose to work? How do you work? And it's going to be different for everyone. And we just hope that co-working offers a variety of those choices that people will choose.
So what was the catalyst of you actually executing the idea? Because a lot of times we all have these ideas.
Yeah.
What made you actually do it?
Yeah, so back in about 2005, I was an architect. I still am now, licensed. And I was looking forward to opening my own shop. And I just kind of knew enough about myself that I would want to have, share an office with a few friends. Not just for the social aspect, but really to share the costs of the copier and the network and kind of the office infrastructure. And I started to play with some numbers and realize it's no different than how some people may approach real estate, where you might buy like a 4-plex or a 6-plex apartment, you get the nicest unit, and everyone else pays for your mortgage. So I looked at it as that, and so okay, I would have 20 other people pay me in sort of so-called either rent or membership, and then that would then pay for the rent and the cost of the office space. So I took that concept and just played with some numbers and came up with a shared office concept. It wasn't actually until we were in construction that I stumbled upon the actual term called co-working, which was coined in 2006 by Brad Newberg, and we opened in early 2008. So this was like a very short, same timeline. Now that term co-working actually was not known to the general public, so I didn't even use it in my tours and sales pitches for years until probably 2013, 2014. And thanks to WeWork, it became more of a household term. It still isn't per se, but way more than had WeWork not been around. So they've done a lot of good for our industry despite their volatility and their chaos. But they basically put co-working on the map on a consumer level, on a household name level.
So what was the first BLANKSPACES like?
So we were only just under 5,000 square feet. I chose a place in mid-Wilshire, that would be on Wilshire and La Brea, because it looked dead center to most of LA. And for 2 solid years, we were the only co-working space in all of LA. We're talking about a gateway city, a city with, greater LA is probably in the 13, 14 million range, and no one copied us for 2 years. And then one person copied us 2 years later. Then it wasn't until 2011 that then we had a few more entries into the market. But I was just really surprised that no one followed my lead for at least 2 years. So we were there for about 10 years and it ran its course. It didn't help that the metro was expanding down Wilshire Boulevard and it was kind of on the street level, kind of chaotic. And we didn't see that they would be done anytime soon. So we exited that and focused on our other locations.
Wow. And how has it changed since the beginning?
You have to keep in mind that within the office market in this country, flexible office spaces, which includes co-working, which includes incubator spaces, are only 2 or 3% of the office market. So we're a tiny sliver. But I think given kind of the state of the office market now, that we seem much more visible than the 2 or 3%, either because people are aware of our concept or because we seem to be succeeding, whereas the rest of the office market seems to be really, barely surviving. There's a lot of landlords who have turned their property back over to the lender because they haven't been able to hold on to the property. So I think we're kind of in the boxing realm, right? We're kind of punching up. We're very small people, but we have a bigger presence than it seems. And so in that regard, it's been great to be front and center into the topic of how people work, but also as a small but bright star within this very dark office realm. And so we're starting to really provide successful solutions to the landlord's problems, which is vacancy, which is the problem for neighborhoods, which is emptiness on the street, which is a problem for economic development for the cities, as how do you activate the culture and the community of that neighborhood? We're becoming a way to have a good outcome in there.
So you studied to be an architect at Harvard?
Yes.
And are your parents surprised that you're an entrepreneur?
Probably not. My father was an entrepreneur for a while. He started a chain of kids clothing and kids toys. It's called LExC. It's in Taiwan. It's now publicly traded over 100 plus locations. It's sort of like in the US, it's the equivalent of Kids R Us when that was around, or Babies R Us, sorry. So maybe one notch higher in terms of quality of clothing. We got it to about, I think, 10 locations, and then my father sold it to the person who eventually took it to 100. So there's small business kind of mindset in our family. When we came to the States in 77, my parents started and owned a local Hallmark and office supply store before Staples came around. So it was a place everyone went to get their Sunday papers, candy, office supplies, and stuff. So they never really scaled that big in the U.S. They didn't repeat the success they had in Taiwan. So I think the fact that I would open is probably not too much of a surprise once I announced. So.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about RTO, returning to the office. How have you seen that evolve, especially after COVID?
Yeah, so just to give you a couple of data points, in the world of office before the pandemic, we were talking about maybe 7 or 8% of all the office workers that were fully remote. These are people who always worked. The people you saw in the coffee shop worked from home, worked at airport lounges, wherever they might be. So it's a pretty small number. That number now is more than double. I would say it's 18, 19, almost 20% now. So the pandemic did usher in an ability to work remotely, whether you're working for an American company based out of Spain. That's much more prevalent now. There's a lot of talk about RTO where the companies like Amazon and ironically Zoom, the company who provided us the ability to do virtual video conferencing, they've called all their workers to go back into the office. But those are just headlines. And really, that's a small percentage of the office workers. So you should really just take it with a grain of salt, the headlines you see, because how many people do you know really work for Fortune 100 companies? Very many people work for medium and small business companies, work for themselves. So I think what it's coming down to is a very now obvious logical outcome, which is 1/3 will be in the office every day, 4 or 5 days a week. One third will be kind of the middle ground flex, 2 or 3 days a week. They might have to be Tuesday and Thursdays or specific days of the week, but the other days they are working either remotely where they can just choose wherever they want to work. And then the last third will be made up of both fully remote or completely voluntary office. There is an office they could go to, and they may choose to go just once a month for like a staff gathering. They may choose to go, every alternate Friday because that's when their product team or the team gets together. But it's either very voluntary or just maybe changes from team to team. So one third, one third, one third. And like, I think with most things that, happen in life, that's almost very standard. But we just need a little more time post pandemic to stabilize at that number. Right now, there's a lot of headlines that claims its pendulum's going to swing one way or the other, but it's kind of all coalescing to a natural like asymptote.
So my daughter has an internship at the LA Times, and she goes there every single day. And she says just like, why is it like I'm the last person to leave the office? And she said like it's empty. Yeah. Do you think that it will ever become full, or is this just an LA thing?
Well, LA definitely has a smaller percentage at RTO. It's a product of two things. One is our culture, but when I started this concept back in when I was researching in 2006, they talked about the number of freelancers in the office world, right? So before I talked about people who actually work in an office, but when you talk about all the workers out there, a typical city like New York, SF, they're pretty progressive. They had 25, 30% of them as freelancers, Whether you are a delivery person, you are a movie producer, you're technically a freelancer. Steven Spielberg is a freelancer. But LA, because of entertainment and because of the culture, back then was already 37%. Okay, that's a huge jump. 1/3 higher than the norm at pretty progressive cities. We're not talking about like a more traditional city or a secondary city like, let's say, Wichita, Kansas, or Tulsa, Oklahoma. We're talking about like these East and West Coast gateway cities. So when you put that fact together, it's not a surprise that LA continues to be more likely to not be returned to the office, and they'll have some level of flexibility, some aspect of unwillingness to go in on a mandated basis. Whereas cities like DC and New York, if they have a lot of finance and legal, are more likely to have to go into the office, either because their company culture is that, or because the type of job they have requires them to be in person for privacy reasons, right? Healthcare has to follow HIPAA, right? And finance people have something called FINRA, and they have to make sure that everything's on site, et cetera, et cetera. So, but everyone else, will not be beholden to those rules.
So I was watching a panel with the World Economic Forum, and they were talking about how a lot of times it's the young people who do want to get to in-person working because they really want the community, and also the older people who have already raised all their kids because they also want community and they love to mentor. Have you heard about that?
Yeah. It's really frustrating when people have such either limited attention or critical thinking to put concepts in just literally one category. And people are never one category. Like if you do, in politics, Asians is not one block. There's East Asians, there's South Asians, et cetera, et cetera. But in the office world, there's at least 3 main levels, right? And you just mentioned it. Kind of have the younger workers, you have the middle managers, and then you have the senior, either retired or soon to be retired workers. The first and third tend to want to be in the office because the younger ones want to learn and be mentored. The older ones want to mentor, or because they're tired of working from home. The middle ones are like, I need help. I need to be able to drop off my kid at baseball, do the doctor's appointment, and have a call. And if you make me go to the office, how am I going to do that? You're telling me not to have a kid. And that's whether you're a father or a mother or any kind of parent who isn't even, stay at home. And this is just trying to juggle. So I think those are your 3 main levels. And so when you talk about return to office, it's appropriate for certain people and less desirable for others. But the younger workers, for sure, they tend to want to be in the office because, the office tends to be nicer than whatever home they're in because, they're young and they're new. The budgets are low. They have roommates. The office is kind of like it's an equalizer. So no matter what kind of living conditions you might have, when you're at the office, everyone's at the same office. And so there isn't an inequity that can be built up from there. But as you know, in social circles, there's also inequities when you are in an office because some people, marginalized groups, will feel, there's, not equal treatment, right? I think women feel that. I think minorities feel that. I think LGBT feels that. But either way, like in-person also unleashes not ideal behavior. So those microaggressions people want to avoid and go back to work from home. So it depends. Like I think if you find that your office culture is good, which it should be, then it will be either free or minimal of those poor treatment. And it's a desirable place to want to go, that you want to go regardless of the mandate. And that's for anyone, but especially for the younger workers who are like, well, I need to go to the office to get promoted, network, get mentored, or even have the resources for, have a proper desk, because the only desk I have is the stairwell in my 4-roommate apartment complex, so
yeah,
it's tough.
And I've been to your BLANKSPACES offices, and they are absolutely gorgeous because you're an architect. But I've also seen that, you have a lot of spaces that are flexible, spaces for events, phone booths. Talk a little bit about your strategy about having these different types of working environments.
Yeah, so first of all, if you think about how the name started, which is a riff off of blank canvas, then it just kind of makes sense that the space itself is as flexible as people may need it. It's not like I have movable walls and all that. I think those are often overrated and too expensive, honestly. So it's really about intelligent design, which I happen to have that background. And then also kind of the operations in order to accommodate these flexible situations. Now, after the pandemic, we have the most kind of, you name the possibility and we get the requests. There will be for example, we have a Freddie Mac, which is traditionally pretty very conservative financial company. They happen to have a team of 10 to 15 who want to get together every Tuesday, and they rent a meeting room, but they otherwise work from home. Then there's a company, for example, it's a publicly traded company called Entravision, and they book our multiple meeting rooms, and they bring in like 30, 40 people for 4 days the first week of every month for like 6 months now. I don't really know where their office is, but they like to get together in that format. And then there's ones who just come in every day, and there's one coming every third Thursday. Like, who knows? It's like all over the place. So it's a matter of our ops and our space and our staffing to be able to accommodate all those things. And I'm sure next year it will be different. So,
do you have a lot of community building events for your members?
Yeah. So if you look at the spectrum of like working, we're kind of more pretty neutral in the middle. And that's good and bad in some ways, but it seems to have worked for us. There are ones that are very socially oriented, and I think you could put something like Soho House in that category. You don't really think of them as a workspace, but you like to go there because you can find a place to work, but you're really there for like the food and bev and the vibe and the people, right? And that works for some people. And then on the other hand, you have people like Regis, these kind of executive suites that are like purely office. And there might be a community involved in some of those aspects, but they're not kind of known for that, right? So put them all the way as that. We're kind of in the middle. We can kind of cater to both, but that means that we're probably not as strong as Regis on the pure office side and not as strong over here. But that seems to have worked, you know what I mean? If you look at the hotel world, right? You go to a Four Seasons, you're like, oh, it's super luxurious and all that, but maybe the price point is too high. But there's some hotels that the rooms are not that great. And you go there because the lobby is great, the restaurant's great. You just know the type of people who go there would be great. So,
like a Marriott?
Yeah, like Marriott, I think tends to be kind of premium, but it strikes a nice middle, but upper middle for sure.
Mm-hmm. Or like a Comfort Inn,
right? I mean, like, some people, Comfort Inn, it's perfect. They want they have a predictable breakfast, and they have locations where they need to be, so that works. So sometimes it's just more functional. Other times it's more brand and aspirational. And in LA, I've chosen a concept that is kind of malleable. And I think when you see a lot of the co-working spaces that have come up and have closed, I think that tenure has proven that this seems to work,
I've seen so many co-working spaces go under. The Wing. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you're familiar with the
Yes.
Wing. I was a member. The Riveter.
Yeah.
I don't know how Industrious is doing. There's a lot of competition. Why do they go down?
So, out of those, Industrious is the one that played smart the whole way. They started in secondary cities, and they looked like a WeWork kind of copycat, knockoff, or twin. And kind of among some of us, we thought their whole strategy was just to open up in secondary cities so WeWork can buy them, and then they just have an exit. But then they ended up competing. WeWork ended up falling, and Industrious, their strategy turned out to be like not steady, but like they weren't trying to skyrocket. They were doing a nice upward climb, and they've done well as a result of that. The others basically overraised money at high valuations. They grew too fast. And like in the case of the Wing, there was also a simultaneous problem with the CEO where there was a internal like corporate culture that turned out to be very toxic. And that happens, It happens with a lot of like iconic CEOs that perceived by the public, they seem amazing, but in-house they're dragons, they're really bad.
Yeah. And I also like how, I think you had mentioned that you also help people. Like you had helped that one, I think, Japanese owner, Ima.
Yeah, Ima.
Ima.
Yeah.
And you were just saying like, oh, she's got a podcast studio too. Like, it's so kind of you to help other people.
Yeah, I guess that's part of my DNA. Like my ethos is just pay it forward. I don't really calculate an ROI on helping things out because I think it'll just come around. And now 17 years later, I'm comfortable with that. If people come around and there's like a benefit for it, for what I did, then great. If not, that's fine too. The way I've also approached it is that co-working happens to be such a niche cottage industry that I'm more starving to find fellow co-working owners than potentially giving away some secret sauce that like, is it really a secret sauce? In many ways, we're like the open concept kitchens, restaurants. Restaurants have open kitchens. You can literally just sit there all day, count the number of waiters, count the number of maitre d's, count the number of stoves and number of dishes that come out, right? You could do that. But could you then take over as the owner the next day? There's still like behind the scenes, there's still a lot of experience-driven skills that's required to own that. So like, I guess I'm mostly of an open book. And I'm not afraid to do that. But, I think we were talking about earlier before this session is the need for meeting like-minded people. And in my case, it wasn't just fellow co-working owners, but fellow entrepreneurs. And at the end of the day, we're running a business. I happen to be brick and mortar, which means that we have a physical presence versus a digital company like, let's say Snapchat or a digital app. At the end of the day, there is a profit and loss, a revenue source that we have to manage, and it can get pretty lonely.
Yeah. Yes, everyone's lonely. That's why they're listening to this podcast. So in EO, we have this thing called the top 5% and the bottom 5%.
Yeah.
Can you share a challenge for you, like the bottom 5%, so visitors can learn? I mean, listeners can learn.
Well, I don't know if it's the bottom 5%, but I'll put it as the unfortunate collateral damage. So I was the first co-working space, as I told you, for a couple of years, and probably nationally, first 10 or so in the country. And I got some notoriety. I got press placements in almost everywhere except for Wall Street Journal and New York Times, but like LA Times, whatever, you name it. And it was great. But that also means that I had a target on my back. And I think most entrepreneurs who are truly introducing a new product or service to the market will see that like, if it's not innovative or notable enough, it's probably not really going to succeed. So that's a plus and minus. You have to be unique enough, but then that means that you likely will have a target on your back. Someone's trying to take you down, someone trying to copy you or whatever. And unfortunately, I had those as well. I took on an investment partner, and that went south pretty quickly, and spent some time legally to unravel all that. And I think, if that person decides to hear this podcast, I would say pretty objectively, looking back, 10, 12 years later, that had we stuck together as partners, no matter, even if we didn't personally like each other, if we had just stuck to our playbook, we would be 20 or 30 locations by now. You know what I mean? Because the concept still worked. And if we had just stuck to our roles, we don't need to like each other. We just need to like the business itself, right? And anyone should be able to be cordial in running a business. You don't have to want to have barbecue and take drinks with them.
What would you have done differently?
Well, I wouldn't have taken on that partner, right? Yeah. I think finding either a business partner, investor, or all those, people say it's like dating and marriage, right? Marriage is a partnership, and sometimes it works, and sometimes, unfortunately, it doesn't. And when it doesn't, it could be amicable, or it could be bloody south bad.
Yeah. One of the first advice that my dad gave, who also is an entrepreneur, was to do it yourself. And when I started my first company, and it was like the hardest thing to do because I was coming from the Getty, and I had seen all my friends starting businesses, but with other partners, and it was very lonely. And I'm glad that I took that to heart. But I had the same type of experience when I had my other company, LExC.
Yeah, so I remain solo.
Yeah.
I have some investors, but they're not involved at all in the daily part of the business. I don't even have a board. And so in that way, it is lonely. And even my friends, none of them own businesses. My wife is a teacher, so she doesn't own a business. No one really gets it, And so the thing I told you about, one of the first lessons I learned about having a target on your back, the other lesson I learned on day 2 of opening my business was that I was a safety net for my employees and my customers and my vendors. If I didn't perform, right, my customers wouldn't get the service they sought, my employees wouldn't have a paycheck and food on the table, and my suppliers wouldn't have their bills paid.
And your family. Right.
So that's a daunting responsibility. I think had someone really crystal clear clarify that to me, I might have hesitated a little bit, because most people don't realize that that's really what you're taking on. When you say you're going to be a parent, I think some people get it, but they might underestimate it, but they understand there's a baby and they're going to be fully dependent on you, right? But when you do a business, you don't really think of it that way, but your business is your baby, right?
For me, when I went into business, I thought to myself, failure is not an option. Did you have any type of precepts in your body?
I was like my junior, senior in high school. I didn't think failure would even happen. I was like, I'll succeed. Looking back,
right?
So naive,
right?
Yeah. Now, obviously, I survived. I don't know if that's success.
100% that's success.
But I think success is when you don't quit.
Yeah.
So,
I love Dr. Maria Nemeth's definition of success. Success is doing what you said you were going to do consistently with clarity, focus, ease, and grace.
Yeah. So far, I'm moving on year 18, and that will be 18 years, hopefully, of success. The same thing, repeating itself.
Yeah. What are you looking forward to?
The pandemic actually kind of woke me up to the business a bit, because so many new avenues opened up. Maybe not new avenues, more like avenues I thought would come before the pandemic, but finally are coming to fruition. So the way I'm structuring deals is more of what I had hoped for, which is more partnerships with property owners, but also the value of coworking. Remember, we continued to be only 2 or 3% of the market, but I think maybe 40% of the office people know what coworking is now. So we're punching up. So I just hope to kind of take this ride and continue to help evolve the LA version of office, and then get a little footnote in the history books that I was a small player in all of that. I know that when we opened coworking, This is back in the days of like Friendster and MySpace, and Twitter was barely starting. I mean, this is super early, '08, right? We were kind of a default place that people gathered for events and workspace for the tech folks. For whatever LA was known for tech, which was mostly social networks, right? Again, early days, and some like advertising tech and such. But we were around before Silicon Beach. So the co-working spaces are critical components of that tech ecosystem. And I think in the history notes, I will get some credit for helping shape and enable Silicon Beach to have happened in LA.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any daily habits that keep you grounded?
So I moved into a new home about 2 years ago, and I didn't have any place to have a desk. It was just kind of a compact house. So our main family like TV on the wall is my computer monitor. And I spent months trying to figure out how I should work in front of the TV. And I now just stand and work all day. It took a while because I would do 2 hours at a time, sit down. I didn't mean to want to stand all day, but like the height of the TV and my height just made sense, so I could be kind of straight on with the TV screen. So if you ever were to Zoom with me, you'll see that I'm standing. And so people talk about making sure that you move somewhat instead of just sitting all day, because that's really bad for your body. And by standing and then like walking to get my tea or lunch and stuff, I am moving in that way, and where I like kind of sway back and forth when I'm standing and working. And then on the flip side is I found that like around 5 or 6, I will feel pretty tired because my legs have been standing all day, that I will stop. And I think that's a natural way to stop working for the day, versus some people who, if they sit and work, they might work 12 and 15 hours and then just like push their body to beyond the limits that their body should do. So that mostly is my daily habit. Other than that, like I've been trying to add a morning walk, because a best practice that some people subscribe to is that even if you work from home, you need a routine as if you're going to work. So if you walk around the neighborhood, and that's that 15-minute that 30-minute commute, then when you get to your desk, even though it's back at your home, it feels like you had like a journey to the office, even if that office is still back at home. I've yet to do that. I did it a little bit during the deep throes of the pandemic, but somehow I stopped. So I want to pick that back up. So those are kind of my 2 daily routines.
Yeah, and then get some sunlight.
That's right. My blood test results showed that my vitamin D level was too low. I think Asians are predisposed to low vitamin D. But I also noticed that I took the blood test at different times of the year, and I realized that after the summer, my vitamin D levels were better, clearly because you're outside. So if I can just like practice that, I can naturally get my vitamin D level back without taking vitamins.
Yeah, I think vitamin D is so important, and getting your infrared.
Yeah.
So what type of advice would you give to someone who is an aspiring entrepreneur?
I think you got to really take a good look at yourself and see what you want to do. Recently, I've been telling people that there's for people who are ambitious, people who think can be successful, or who really have the right skill set, there are 3 types of kind of leaders. The number 1 leader is the CEO founder, willing to take all chances. You're basically gambling every day. Every day, your decision is a gamble. And you want to take all the credit when things go well, but you have to be willing to be the scapegoat when things don't go well. There's a number 2 person, and that number 2 person either doesn't have either the creativity or the courage to fabricate an idea, create an idea, raise money, structure legally. It's too much gray area, but they will take a concept someone gives them and then run with it. So they like to be the number 2 person. They run ops. They're probably not ever the CEO, but they like to be, they like to lead the group. The number 3 person is sort of like behind the scenes person. They want to have almost as much like authority, but they cannot take the liability. They cannot take the hits. So they want to be kind of in the background, but they want to be close enough to have the influence. So everyone knows the number one, number two, number three people in your lives, at least for those who are like successful and ambitious. So you have to figure out like what you are, because if you aren't clearly a number one, you should find another number one and be their number two. And you can still be part of a co-founder. You could be part of a startup. You can be part of a business, but you don't need to be, the lead.
Right. Sort of just similar to the entrepreneurial operating system, the CEO and then the integrator.
Oh,
yeah,
yes. Yeah, but I think there's the third tier, the person who's kind of like behind the curtain, and never really wants the notoriety, but likes to know, like, just for themselves, that they help, shape everything.
Yeah, that's really wise. That's so interesting.
Yeah. I think some people in the tech world might call the number two or the number three person as the GTM, go to market, right? You introduce the concept, but then now they bring it to the market, but they didn't have to do all the other messy stuff of partnerships and investors and, term sheets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They know how to sell.
Yeah. They know how to sell. Once you give them the script, off and running.
What type of advice would you give to someone who's been in business for decades? Like you?
Yeah, 2 decades. I only have done this one. Well, technically, I run an architecture firm as well, because I was licensed and I never wanted to give that up. It's a relatively small business. It does overlap with BLANKSPACES because I hired myself to design this.
Perfect.
So I think seeing a service-oriented business that's small and then a larger 10-employee kind of business that's more brick and mortar has its comparisons. I think you just got to stick with it. If you want to encounter success, you can't quit. If you quit, then you'll never have tasted the success. Some people say you got to do what you're passionate about. I don't fully agree with that, because some passions just don't monetize, right? Some passions, it's almost like, do you want to live where you work and work where you live? Some people need the separation. If you love your company, yeah, great. And some people say that the moment you wake up and you no longer have the passion, you should just close up the business or exit. I haven't been there yet. I did hint that, like, in the pandemic, I did wonder how long this would last. But now that the pandemic is generally over, and we have a whole new awakening of how people work, that has invigorated me. Had that not happened, I wonder if I would have had this level of stamina for another, 5 or 10 years. Like, let's see, if you had asked me like 4 years ago, would I sign, let's say, a 10-year lease? Probably not. Would I sign one now? I would emotionally. I wouldn't do it financially because there are other options to do that, but I'm just trying to give you an example. Would I commit to another 10 years? I would. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think being in the mix and in some ways in the forefront of how people work is really, really exciting. And hopefully I can get myself in the history books of, at least in the LA work style, work world of how people do it. Because with so many fellow co-working spaces who have closed, they unfortunately didn't get a chance to see it their concept realized in this new post-COVID kind of world. And I get to do that. That's good. That's great.
Yeah. And also paying it forward as well. You did a lot during the wildfires.
Oh, thanks. If I or our community or our spaces can help out in certain ways, we're happy to do so. We've always sponsored or allowed free or cheap uses of our meeting rooms for like nonprofits and other organizations. But this one was one of the biggest. We hosted a what do you call that when people drop a volunteer
donation drop off?
Yeah, it was a donation drive, but it was permanent for it was a 24/7 kind of operation for 3 or 4 weeks. And we were close enough to the Palisades, but far enough that there were a lot of people who were still in that area, and they could drop off things, they could pick up things without having to pay. And so in that way, it was great. I can't take the credit for that. All someone did was say, "Hey, Jerome, will you help us?" And I said, "Okay." So in that case, I was the number 2, number 3 person, right? But I'm happy to have been close enough to be, to help out.
No, I think I was a recipient to one of the things. I got an
Yes.
air filter.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you so much.
Yeah, I remember telling you, it's like, I see 2 air filters. You want me to pick one up for you?
Thank you so much. Because we're here in the space here that's temporary. Because my place was in the Palisades, so I think it's over there. So thank you so much for the air filter.
Yeah, I was just reading the article about in the Altadena, but it's probably the same in Pacific Palisades. The soils, the air, even the homes that remain standing, like they're toast. Unfortunately, there's so many toxins in every part of the home that you may have to just completely demolish it and rebuild. It's going to take a while for everyone to remediate the soils, remediate the air, and make it so it's livable again. I think people who aren't looking at the science of it really underestimate what we're up against in order to rebuild. And so I hope the ones who are rebuilding, go carefully, because you may be a little premature if you're rebuilding now.
Yeah, I heard that during 9/11, the people who did go back to live and work, 10 years later, 10,000 people had leukemia.
Right. I mean, as simple as asthma, but yes, then leukemia. Those who helped out, through the rubbles, I know someone who did that, and she has now asthma permanently as a result of deciding to volunteer and help. These things are pretty traumatic to your bodies.
Yeah.
We have to be careful of that. I think hopefully during the pandemic, people everywhere in the world learn this lesson that you're not as resilient as you think you are, because everyone, these chemicals and this air quality can affect you in more ways than you can imagine.
Yeah, health is wealth.
Yes. Yeah. Like I tell my kids, I might be a lot older than them, but I think I remain generally healthy. So far, knock on wood.
Well, if people wanted to reach out to you, maybe there's other EOers who do have co-working spaces. I think they do, like all around the world. How can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I'm on all your usual socials. LinkedIn, my first name is Jerome, last name is Chang, that's Chang. It's very rare to have my first name. So when you put that on the Google search or LinkedIn, I'm pretty much the first or second person that pops up. So I'm on Instagram. I'm on as Jerome USA1, and LinkedIn as Jerome Chang. I'm actually still on X, but I mostly just read that to find out kind of the other points of views. And I'm on Facebook. Or Jerome@BLANKSPACES.com.
I really enjoyed talking to you. Really inspiring. And thank you so much for all your help in the past. You've hosted a lot of EO events. You've hosted a lot of EO forums. And I'm so glad that we got a chance to talk and share your story with everyone around the world.
Yeah. Thank you.